Hello and welcome to another grammar segment with Professor Dennis. In one of our earlier lectures, we briefly touched on the concept of clauses when we were taking a look at phrases. From that lecture, if you recall, there are two types of clauses, dependent and independent. For this segment, we're going to go a little bit more in depth on these two types of clauses. By the end of this, I want you to be able to accomplish two things. If you get the more detailed types of dependent clauses, bonus for you. If not, that's fine. This right here, these two things, they are your main objective. I want you to be able to identify a dependent clause and identify an independent clause. Last time we learned about phrases. Now you're going to learn about clauses. What's the difference? Let's recap. A clause has both a subject and a verb. A phrase is either missing a subject, a verb, or both. A phrase is a group of words that work together as part of a clause. Phrases are really the building blocks of a clause. So what is a clause? A clause is built with multiple phrases. At the very least, it will have two different types of phrases. A noun phrase that acts as the subject, and a verb phrase that acts as a predicate. Let's take a look at a few samples of clauses. While you were out, I went to the store because he needed to know. The little corgi annoyed the owner by barking nonstop. Does anything feel incomplete about any of these clauses? There should be two that feel like an incomplete thought. But why? They both have a subject. They both have a predicate. So then why does this feel so incomplete? By the way, those two are while you were out and because he needed to know. And they feel incomplete because of one little word at the start of each clause. Let's see what you think when I take that one little word out. You were out. He needed to know. All of a sudden, we have a complete thought. So what's so special about these little words at the start of this clause? Well, these words are called subordinate conjunctions. If you recall from earlier lessons, conjunctions are meant to connect words, phrases, and clauses. However, not all conjunctions are equal. The conjunctions that would have these seen as equals are the fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are called coordinating conjunctions, and they coordinate things to make them feel equal. The two conjunctions you see here are subordinating conjunctions. They still connect the words and phrases, but not as equals that can stand alone. That brings us to our two different types of clauses, dependent and independent. The dependent clause cannot stand alone. It needs something in order to make complete sense. You can think of this type of clause as a baby or toddler who needs help being held up to walk in order to make complete sense. They have to be attached to an independent clause. Now, the independent clause can stand alone. It makes complete sense by itself. If there's a subordinate conjunction, the dependent clause would need to be attached to an independent clause. But the independent clause will never need to be attached to a dependent clause in order to make sense. It's like the college student who's now out on their own, ready to tackle whatever comes their way. There are three different types of dependent clauses, and what type of clause you use and have will depend on where it fits in the sentence structure that you plan on using, which will be covered in another segment specifically on sentence structures. For now, understand that you can have three types of dependent clauses: a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. We're going to examine each of these as we move forward. The noun clause contains a subject and a verb. It can replace the noun, or the noun can replace the entire phrase or clause. It can also give more specific information about the noun. Let's see how each of these underlined noun clauses are functioning. In the first sample, we have an entire clause with a subject, whoever, and a verb, turned. This whole clause would not make sense on its own. Whoever turned the ovens off, if we stop there, we're left with a question of what? Whoever turned the ovens off, what? There has to be more, and there is. This entire clause is acting as the subject of the sentence. Whoever turned the ovens off is keeping quiet. Our second sample, we have the same construct. The clause, what you eat, is acting as the subject. With the final sample, we have a clause that fits into the middle of the independent clause. In this case, the clause is acting to give us more information and explain what the fact actually is. And the fact is that you are here. So the fact that you are here is reassuring to me. The adjective clause contains a subject and a verb, is used as an adjective to describe a noun or a pronoun, answers the questions which, what, whom, who, and will normally follow the word it is describing. You can see from these samples that the adjective phrase does indeed follow all of these rules. Each one has a subject and a verb. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a clause. All of these are used to describe a noun. The first answers the question who. The second sample also answers the question who. Our third sample answers the question what, as in what season. And the last sample answers the question which, as in which house. Note that each one follows the noun it is describing. The dependent adverb clause contains a subject and a verb. It's used as an adverb to describe a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. And it adds information to the main clause in terms of time, frequency, condition, cause and effect, or intensity. Each of these samples does follow these rules. Each one has a subject and a verb, otherwise it wouldn't be a clause. And each one describes either a verb, an adjective, or an adverb from the independent clause. With the first sample, the adverb phrase is describing the fact that there is no money, and it lays out a cause and effect relationship. In the second sample, we have another cause and effect relationship that describes the entire independent clause. And in our third sample, we have a conditional item that describes what it takes to be happy. In our last sample, we're told to what intensity he answered the questions. So it's describing the verb. Note that when this type of clause is at the start of the sentence, it does require a comma before you move into the independent clause. I'm sure right now you're asking yourself, so what? The so what is that when you have an understanding of how phrases work to build sentences, and you understand how independent and dependent clauses work together to build your thoughts, you have a stronger modality of communication in both the written and the spoken word. Whether you grasp the vocabulary being used or not is irrelevant at this point. The important part is seeing how these two types of clauses work together. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, do not hesitate to use that inbox feature or email icon in your learning management system. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you on the flip side.